Section 5 of State of the Union Addresses by United States Presidents, 1923 to 1932. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. State of the Union Address, Calvin Coolidge, December 7th, 1926, Part 1. Members of Congress. In reporting to the Congress the State of the Union, I find it impossible to characterize it other than one of general peace and prosperity. In some quarters our diplomacy is vexed with difficult and as yet unsolved problems, but nowhere are we met with armed conflict. If some occupations and areas are not flourishing, in none does there remain any acute chronic depression. What the country requires is not so much new policies as a steady continuation of those which are already being crowned with such abundant success. It cannot be too often repeated that in common with all the world we are engaged in liquidating the war. In the present short session, no great amount of new legislation is possible, but in order to comprehend what is most desirable, some survey of our general situation is necessary. A large amount of time is consumed in the passage of appropriation bills. If each Congress, in its opening session, would make appropriations to continue for 2 years, very much time would be saved, which could either be devoted to a consideration of the general needs of the country or would result in decreasing the work of legislation. Economy. Our present state of prosperity has been greatly promoted by 3 important causes, one of which is economy, resulting in reduction and reform in national taxation. Another is the elimination of many kinds of waste. The third is a general raising of the standards of efficiency. This combination has brought the perfectly astonishing result of a reduction in the index price of commodities and an increase in the index rate of wages. We have secured a lowering of the cost to produce and a raising of the ability to consume. Prosperity resulting from these causes rests on the securest of all foundations. It gathers strength from its own progress. In promoting this progress, the chief part which the national government plays lies in the field of economy. Whatever doubts may have been entertained as to the necessity of this policy, and the beneficial results which would accrue from it to all the people of the nation, its wisdom must now be considered thoroughly demonstrated. It may not have appeared to be a novel or perhaps brilliant conception, but it has turned out to be preeminently sound. It has not failed to work. It has surely brought results. It does not have to be excused as a temporary expedient adopted as the lesser evil to remedy some abuse. It is not a palliative seeking to treat symptoms, but a major operation for the eradication at the source of a large number of social diseases. Nothing is easier than the expenditure of public money. It does not appear to belong to anybody. The temptation is overwhelming to bestow it on somebody. But the results of extravagance are ruinous. The property of the country, like the freedom of the country, belongs to the people of the country. They have not empowered their government to take a dollar of it, except for a necessary public purpose. But if the Constitution conferred such right, sound economics would forbid it. Nothing is more destructive of the progress of the nation than government extravagance. It means an increase in the burden of taxation, dissipation of the returns from enterprise, a decrease in the real value of wages, with ultimate stagnation and decay. The whole theory of our institutions is based on the liberty and independence of the individual. He is dependent on himself for support and therefore entitled to the rewards of his own industry. He is not to be deprived of what he earns, that others may be benefited by what they do not earn. What he saves through his private effort is not to be wasted by government extravagance. Our national activities have become so vast that it is necessary to scrutinize each item of public expenditure if we are to apply the principle of economy. At the last session, we made an immediate increase in the annual budget of more than $100 million in benefits conferred on the veterans of 3 wars, public buildings, and river and harbor improvement. Many projects are being broached requiring further large outlays. I am convinced that it would be greatly for the welfare of the country if we avoid at the present session all commitments except those of the most pressing nature. From a reduction of the debt and taxes will accrue a wider benefit to all the people of this country than from embarking on any new enterprise. When our War Department is decreased, we shall have resources for expansion. Until that is accomplished, we should confine ourselves to expenditures of the most urgent necessity. The Department of Commerce has performed a most important function in making plans and securing support of all kinds of national enterprise for the elimination of waste. Efficiency has been greatly promoted through good management and the constantly increasing cooperation of the wage earners throughout the whole realm of private business. It is my opinion that this whole development has been predicated on the foundation of a protective tariff. Tax reduction. As a result of economy of administration by the executive and of appropriation by the Congress, the end of this fiscal year will leave a surplus in the Treasury estimated at $383 million. Unless otherwise ordered, such surplus is used for the retirement of the war debt. A bond which can be retired today for 100 cents will cost the people 104 1/4 cents to retire a year from now. While I favor a speedy reduction of the debt as already required by law, and in accordance with the promises made to the holders of our Liberty bonds when they were issued, there is no reason why a balanced proportion of surplus revenue should not be applied to a reduction of taxation. It cannot be repeated too often that the enormous revenues of this nation could not be collected without becoming a charge on all the people, whether or not they directly pay taxes. Everyone who is paying for the bare necessities of food and shelter and clothing, without considering the better things in life, is indirectly paying a national tax. The nearly 20 million owners of securities, the additional scores of millions of holders of insurance policies and depositors in savings banks are all paying a national tax. Millions of individuals and corporations are making a direct contribution to the national treasury, which runs from 1.5% to 25% of their income, besides a number of special requirements, like automobile and admission taxes. Whenever the state of the treasury will permit, I believe in a reduction of taxation. I think the taxpayers are entitled to it. But I am not advocating tax reduction merely for the benefit of the taxpayer. I am advocating it for the benefit of the country. If it appeared feasible, I should welcome permanent tax reduction at this time. The estimated surplus, however, for June 30th, 1928, is not much larger than is required in a going business of nearly $4 billion. We've had but a few months' experience under the present Revenue Act, and shall need to know what is developed by the returns of income produced under it, which are not required to be made until about the time this session terminates, and what the economic probabilities of the country are in the latter part of 1927, before we can reach any justifiable conclusion as to permanent tax reduction. Moreover, the present surplus results from many non-recurrent items. Meantime, it is possible to grant some real relief by a simple measure making reductions in the payments which accrue on the 15th of March and June 1927. I am very strongly of the conviction that this is so much a purely business matter that it ought not to be dealt with in a partisan spirit. The Congress has already set the notable example of treating tax problems with much reference to party, which might well be continued. What I desire to advocate most earnestly is relief for the country from unnecessary tax burdens. We cannot secure that if we stop to engage in a partisan controversy. As I do not think any change in the special taxes or a tiny permanent reduction is practical, I therefore urge both parties of the House Ways and Means Committee to agree on a bill granting the temporary relief which I have indicated. Such a reduction would directly affect millions of taxpayers, release large sums for investment in new enterprise, stimulating industrial production and agricultural consumption, and indirectly benefiting every family in the whole country. These are my convictions, stated with full knowledge that it is for the Congress to decide whether they judge it best to make such a reduction or leave the surplus for the present year to be applied to retirement of the war debt. That also is eventually tax reduction. Protective tariff. It is estimated that customs receipts for the present fiscal year will exceed $615 million, the largest which were ever secured from that source. The value of our imports for the last fiscal year was $4,466 million, an increase of more than 71% since the present tariff law went into effect. Of these imports, about 65%, or roughly $2,900 million, came in free of duty, which means that the United States affords a duty-free market to other countries almost equal in value to the total imports of Germany, and greatly exceeding the total imports of France. We have admitted a greater volume of free imports than any other country except England. We are therefore levying duties on about $1,550 million of imports. Nearly half of this, or $700 million, is subject to duties for the protection of agriculture and have their origin in countries other than Europe. They substantially increased the prices received by our farmers for their produce. About $300 million more is represented by luxuries such as costly rugs, furs, precious stones, etc. This leaves only about $550 million of our imports under a schedule of duties, which is in general under consideration when there is discussion of lowering the tariff. While the duties on this small portion, representing only about 12% of our imports, undoubtedly represent the difference between a fair degree of prosperity or marked depression to many of our industries, and the difference between good pay and steady work, or wide unemployment to many of our wage earners, it is impossible to conceive how other countries of our own importers could be greatly benefited if these duties are reduced. Those who are starting an agitation for a reduction of tariff duties, partly at least for the benefit of those to whom money has been lent abroad, ought to know that there does not seem to be a very large field within the area of our imports in which probable reductions would be advantageous to foreign goods. Those who wish to benefit foreign producers are much more likely to secure that result by continuing the present enormous purchasing power which comes from our prosperity that increased our imports over 71% in 4 years than from any advantages that are likely to accrue from a general tariff reduction. Agriculture. The important place which agriculture holds in the economic and social life of the nation cannot be overestimated. The national government is justified in putting forth every effort to make the open country a desirable place to live. No condition meets this requirement which fails to supply a fair return on labor expended and capital invested. While some localities and some particular crops furnish exceptions, in general, agriculture is continuing to make progress in recovering from the depression of 1921 and 1922. Animal products and food products are in a more encouraging position, while cotton, due to the high prices of past years, supplemented by ideal weather conditions, has been stimulated to a point of temporary overproduction. Acting on the request of the cotton-growing interests, appointed a committee to assist in carrying out their plans. As a result of this cooperation, sufficient funds have been pledged to finance the storage and carrying of 4 million bales of cotton. Whether those who own the cotton are willing to put a part of their stock into this plan depends on themselves. The federal government has cooperated in providing ample facilities. No method of meeting the situation would be adequate which does not contemplate a reduction of about 1/3 in the acreage for the coming year. The responsibility for making the plan effective lies with those who own and finance cotton and cotton lands. The Department of Agriculture estimates the net income of agriculture for the year 1920 through 21 at only $375 million. For 1924 through 25, $2,656 million. For 1925 through 26, $2,757 million. This increase has been brought about in part by the method already referred to, of federal tax reduction, the elimination of waste, and increased efficiency in industry. The wide gap that existed a few years ago between the index price of agricultural products and the index price of other products has been gradually closing up, though the recent depression in cotton has somewhat enlarged it. Agriculture had on the whole been going higher while industry had been growing lower. Industrial and commercial activities, being carried on for the most part by corporations, are taxed at a much higher rate than farming, which is carried on by individuals. This will inevitably make industrial commodity costs high, while war taxation lasts. It is because of this circumstance that national tax reduction has a very large indirect benefit upon the farmer, though it cannot relieve him from the very great burden of the local taxes which he pays directly. We have practically relieved the farmer of any federal income tax. There is agreement on all sides that some portions of our agricultural industry have lagged behind other industries in recovery from the war, and that further improvement in methods of marketing of agricultural products is more desirable. There is belief also that the federal government can further contribute to these ends beyond the many helpful measures taken during the last 5 years, through the different acts of Congress for advancing the interests of the farmers. The Packers and Stockyards Act, establishing of the Intermediate Credit Banks for Agricultural Purposes, the Purnell Act for Agricultural Research, the Capper-Volstead Cooperative Marketing Act, the Cooperative Marketing Act of 1926, amendments to the Warehousing Act, the enlargement of the activities of the Department of Agriculture, enlargement of the scope of loans by the Farm Loan Board, the tariff on agricultural products, the large federal expenditure in improvement of waterways and highways, the reduction of federal taxes. In all, comprise a great series of governmental actions in the advancement of the special interest of agriculture. In determination of what further measures may be undertaken, it seems to me there are certain pitfalls which must be avoided, and our test in avoiding them should be to avoid disaster to the farmer himself. Acting upon my recommendation, the Congress has ordered the Interstate Commerce Commission to investigate the freight rate structure, directing that such changes shall be made in freight rates as will promote freedom of movement of agricultural products. Railroad consolidation, which I am advocating, would also result in a situation where rates could be made more advantageous for farm produce, as has recently been done in the revision of rates on fertilizers in the South. Additional benefit will accrue from the development of our inland waterways. The Mississippi River system carries a commerce of over 50 million tons, at a savings of nearly $18 million annually. The Inland Waterways Corporation operates boats on 2,500 miles of navigable streams, and through its relation with 165 railroads, carries freight into and out of 45 states of the Union. During the past 6 months, it has handled over 1 million bushels of grain monthly, and by its lower freight rates has raised the price of such grain to the farmer probably 2.5 cents to 3 cents a bushel. The highway system, on which the federal government expends about $85 million a year, is of vital importance to the rural regions. The advantages to be derived from a more comprehensive and less expensive system of transportation for agriculture ought to be supplemented by provision for an adequate supply of fertilizer at a lower cost than it is at present obtainable. This advantage we are attempting to secure by the proposed development at Muscle Shoals, and there are promising experiments being made in synthetic chemistry for the production of nitrates. A survey should be made of the relation of government grazing lands to the livestock industry. Additional legislation is desirable, more definitely to establish the place of grazing in the administration of the national forests, properly subordinated to their functions of producing timber and conserving the water supply. Over 180 million acres of grazing lands are still pastured as commons in the public domain, with little or no regulation. This has made their use so uncertain that it has contributed greatly to the instability of the livestock industry. Very little of this land is suited to settlement or private ownership. Some plan ought to be adopted for its use in grazing, corresponding broadly to that already successfully applied to the national forests. The development of sound and strong cooperative associations is of fundamental importance to our agriculture. It is encouraging to note, therefore, that a vigorous and healthy growth in the cooperative movement is continuing. Cooperative associations reporting to the Department of Agriculture at the end of 1925 had on their membership rolls a total of 2,700,000 producers. Their total business in 1925 amounted to approximately $2,400,000,000, compared with $635,800,000 in 1915. Legislative action to assist cooperative associations and supplement their efforts was passed at the last session of Congress. Important credit measures were also provided by Congress in 1923, which have been of inestimable value to the cooperative associations. Although the federal credit agencies have served agriculture well, I think it may be possible to broaden and strengthen the service of these institutions. Attention is again directed to the surplus problem of agriculture by the present cotton situation. Surpluses often affect prices of various farm commodities in a disastrous manner, and the problem urgently demands a solution. Discussions, both in and out of Congress during the past few years, have given us a better understanding of the subject, and it is my hope that out of the various proposals made, the basis will be found for a sound and effective solution upon which agreement can be reached. In my opinion, cooperative marketing associations will be important aids to the ultimate solution of the problem. It may well be, however, that additional measures will be needed to supplement their efforts. I believe all will agree that such measures should not conflict with the best interests of the cooperatives, but rather assist and strengthen them. In working out this problem to any sound conclusion, it is necessary to avoid putting the government into the business of production or marketing, or attempting to enact legislation for the purpose of price fixing. The farmer does not favor any attempted remedies that partake of these elements. He has a sincere and candid desire for assistance. If matched by an equally sincere and candid consideration of the difficult remedies proposed, a sound measure of relief ought to result. It is unfortunate that no general agreement has been reached by the various agricultural interests upon any of the proposed remedies. Out of the discussion of various proposals which can be had before the committees of agriculture, some measure ought to be perfected which would be generally satisfactory. Due to the emergency arising from a heavy tropical storm in southern Florida, I authorized the Secretary of Agriculture to use certain funds in anticipation of legislation to enable the farmers in that region to plant their crops. The department will present a bill ratifying the loans which were made for this purpose. Federal legislation has been adopted authorizing the cooperation of the government with states and private owners in the protection of forest lands from fire. This preventative measure is of such great importance that I have recommended it for an increased appropriation. Another preventative measure of great economic and sanitary importance is the eradication of tuberculosis in cattle. Active work is now in progress in 1/4 of the counties of the United States to secure this result. Over 12 million cattle have been under treatment, and the average degree of infection has fallen from 4.9% to 2.8%. The federal government is making substantial expenditures for this purpose. Serious damage is threatened to the corn crop by the European corn borer. Since 1917, it has spread from eastern New England westward into Indiana and now covers about 100,000 square miles. It is one of the most formidable pests because it spreads rapidly and is exceedingly difficult of control. It has assumed a menace that is of national magnitude and warrants the federal government in extending its cooperation to the state and local agencies which are attempting to prevent its further spread and secure its eradication. The whole question of agriculture needs most careful consideration. In the past few years, the government has given this subject more attention than any other, and has held more consultations in relation to it than on any other subject. While the government is not to be blamed for failure to perform the impossible, the agricultural regions are entitled to know that they have its constant solicitude and sympathy. Many of the farmers are burdened with debts and taxes which they are unable to carry. We are expending in this country many millions of dollars each year to increase farm production. We ought now to put more emphasis on the question of farm marketing. If a sound solution of a permanent nature can be found for this problem, the Congress ought not to hesitate to adopt it. Development of water resources. In previous messages, I have referred to the national importance of the proper development of our water resources. The great projects of extension of the Mississippi system, the protection and development of the lower Colorado River, are before Congress, and I have previously commented upon them. I favor the necessary legislation to expedite these projects. Engineering studies are being made for connecting the Great Lakes with the North Atlantic, either through an all-American canal or by way of the St. Lawrence River. These reports will undoubtedly be before the Congress during its present session. It is unnecessary to dwell upon the great importance of such a waterway, not only to our mid-continental basin, but to the commerce and development of practically the whole nation. Our river and harbor improvement should be continued in accordance with the present policy. Expenditure of this character is compatible with economy. It is in the nature of capital investment. Work should proceed on the basic trunk lines if this work is to be a success. If the country will be content to be moderate and patient, and permit improvements to be made where they will do the greatest general good, rather than insisting on expenditures at this time on secondary projects, our internal waterways can be made a success. If proposed legislation results in a gross manifestation of local jealousies and selfishness, this program cannot be carried out. Ultimately, we can take care of extensions, but our first effort should be confined to the main arteries. Our inland commerce has been put to great inconvenience and expense by reason of the lowering of the water level of the Great Lakes. This is an international problem, on which competent engineers are making reports. Out of their study, it is expected that a feasible method will be developed for raising the level to provide relief for our commerce and supply water for drainage. Whenever a practical plan is presented, it ought to be speedily adopted. Reclamation. It is increasingly evident that the federal government must in the future take a leading part in the impounding of water for conservation, with incidental power for the development of the irrigable lands and of the region. The unused waters of the West are found mainly in large rivers. Works to store and distribute these have such magnitude and cost that they are not attractive to private enterprise. Water is the irreplaceable natural resource. Its precipitation cannot be increased. Its storage on the higher reaches of streams to meet growing needs, to be used repeatedly as it flows toward the seas, is a practical and prudent business policy. The United States promises to follow the course of older irrigation countries, where recent important irrigation developments have been carried out as national undertakings. It is gratifying, therefore, that conditions on federal reclamation projects have become satisfactory. The gross value of crop grown with water from project works increased from $110 million in 1924 to $131 million in 1925. The adjustments made last year by Congress relieved irrigators from paying construction costs on unprofitable land, and by so doing inspired new hope and confidence in ability to meet the payments required. Construction payments by water users last year were the largest in the history of the Bureau. The anticipated reclamation fund will be fully absorbed for a number of years in the completion of old projects and the construction of projects inaugurated in the past 3 years. We should, however, continue to investigate and study the possibilities of a carefully planned development of promising projects, logically of governmental concern because of their physical magnitude, immense cost, and the interstate and international problems involved. Only in this way may we be fully prepared to meet intelligently the needs of our fast-growing population in the years to come. Transportation. It would be difficult to conceive of any modern activity which contributes more to the necessities and conveniences of life than transportation. Without it, our present agricultural production and practically all of our commerce would be completely prostrated. One of the large contributing causes to the present highly satisfactory state of our economic condition is the prompt and dependable service, surpassing all our previous records, rendered by the railroads. This power has been fostered by the spirit of cooperation between federal and state regulatory commissions. To render this service more efficient and effective, and to promote a more scientific regulation, the process of valuing railroad properties should be simplified, and the primary valuations should be completed as rapidly as possible. The problem of rate reduction would be much simplified by a process of railroad consolidations. This principle has already been adopted as federal law. Experience has shown that a more effective method must be provided. Studies have already been made and legislation introduced seeking to promote this end. It would be of great advantage if it could be taken up at once and speedily enacted. The railroad systems of the country and the convenience of all the people are waiting on this important decision. Merchant Marine. It is axiomatic that no agricultural and industrial country can get the full benefit of its own advantages without a merchant marine. We have been proceeding under the Act of Congress that contemplates the establishment of trade routes to be ultimately transferred to private ownership and operation. Due to temporary conditions abroad and at home, we have a large demand just now for certain types of freight vessels. Some suggestion has been made for new construction. I do not feel that we are yet warranted in entering that field. Such ships as we might build could not be sold after they are launched for anywhere near what they would cost. We have expended over $250 million out of the public treasury in recent years to make up the losses of operation, not counting the depreciation or any cost whatever of our capital investment. The great need for our merchant marine is not for more ships, but for more freight. Our merchants are altogether too indifferent about using American ships for the transportation of goods, which they send abroad or bring home. Some of our vessels necessarily need repairs, which should be made. I do not believe that the operation of our fleet is as economical and efficient as it could be made, if placed under a single responsible head, leaving the shipping board free to deal with general matters of policy and regulation. Radio legislation. The Department of Commerce has for some years urgently presented the necessity for further legislation in order to protect radio listeners from interference between broadcasting stations and to carry out other regulatory functions. Both branches of Congress at the last session passed enactments intended to effect such regulation, but the two bills yet remain to be brought into agreement and final passage. Due to decisions of the courts, the authority of the department under the law of 1912 has broken down. Many more stations have been operating than can be accommodated within the limited number of wavelengths available. Further stations are in course of construction. Many stations have departed from the scheme of allocation set down by the department, and the whole service of this most important public function has drifted into such chaos as seems likely, if not remedied, to destroy its great value. I most urgently recommend that this legislation should be speedily enacted. I do not believe it is desirable to set up further independent agencies in the government. Rather, I believe it advisable to entrust the important functions of deciding who shall exercise the privilege of radio transmission and under what conditions, the assigning of wave lengths and determination of power, to a board to be assembled whenever action on such questions becomes necessary. There should be right of appeal to the courts from the decisions of such board. The administration of the decisions of the board and the other features of regulation and promotion of radio in the public interest, together with scientific research, should remain in the Department of Commerce. Such an arrangement makes for more expert, more efficient, and more economical administration than an independent agency or board, whose duties, after initial stages, require but little attention, in which administrative functions are confused with semi-judicial functions, and from which of necessity there must be greatly increased personnel and expenditure. The wage earner. The great body of our people are made up of wage earners. Several hundred thousands of them are on the payrolls of the United States government. Their condition, very largely, is fixed by legislation. We have recently provided increases in compensation under a method of reclassification and given them the advantage of a liberal retirement system as a support for their declining years. Most of them are under the merit system. This is a guarantee of their intelligence, and the efficiency of their service is a demonstration of their loyalty. The federal government should continue to set a good example for all other employers. In the industries, the condition of the wage earner has steadily improved. The 12-hour day is almost entirely unknown. Skilled labor is well compensated. But there are, unfortunately, a multitude of workers who have not yet come to share in the general prosperity of the nation. Both the public authorities and private enterprises should be solicitous to advance the welfare of this class. The federal government has been seeking to secure this end through a protective tariff, through restrictive immigration, through requiring safety devices for the prevention of accidents, through the granting of workmen's compensation, through civilian vocational rehabilitation and education, through employment information bureaus, and through such humanitarian relief as was provided in the maternity and infancy legislation. And it is a satisfaction to report that a more general condition of contentment exists among wage earners, and the country is more free from labor disputes than it has been for years. While restrictive immigration has been adopted in part for the benefit of the wage earner, and in its entirety for the benefit of the country, it ought not to cause a needless separation of families and dependents from their natural source of support, contrary to the dictates of humanity. End of section 5.